Morning, my name is Mark Cubitt and I'm a member of the Chapter Committee of AIDN, the Australian International Development Network. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the First Nations owners of the lands where we are located. I pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land I am speaking today. I pay my respects to the local people, their elders, past, present and emerging. As for AIDN, our messaging is simple: more and better giving and investing from Australia to international development. One of the ways we are going about this is by showcasing and amplifying the work and issues in the sector. Today is our 6th webinar for 2021. The previous webinars are all available either on our website or on YouTube. And for me, I think it's a particularly interesting topic today, the business of social impact. Clearly, there's a lot of interest out there as well, with a record number of registrations for today's webinar. Tiki Fullerton will be in conversation with Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap, Mark Reading of Atlassian Foundation, and Peter Yao from Thankyou. Tiki Fullerton likely needs no introduction, but in case you haven't looked at any Australian media in the last 2 decades, Tiki is currently the Australian's business editor at large. She has co-anchored Business Weekend on Sky News Australia. You may also have seen her as an investigative reporter on Four Corners, a political reporter in Canberra, and a presenter on Landline. Simon Griffiths launched Who Gives a Crap in 2012 with a fundraising campaign to pre-sell the first $50,000 of toilet rolls. With stellar sales growth in Australia, the US and the UK, Crap has now donated more than $8 million to wash projects around the world. Mark Reading is head of foundation at Atlassian, with over 36 years of business experience, including 21 years at PwC. In his current role, Mark is the bridge between the Australian technology success story that is Atlassian and the charities they choose to support through their Pledge 1% model. Pete Yao joined us in a previous AIDN webinar. Pete joined the Thankyou team back in 2012. He's Chief Impact Officer at Thankyou. He works to ensure that Thankyou's funding amplifies impactful change makers who are working towards systemic and sustainable outcomes for vulnerable and low impact communities. We have a lot to cover in the session today, so let's dive right in. The Q&A and chat functions will be operating today. Feel free to put your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'd now like to hand over to Tiki.
Mark, thank you very much. And thanks to AIDN and welcome everybody. It's great to be here. Look, it's such an important time to be talking about this subject. I think coming out of COVID, everybody has been through a bit of a rumble. And I think, you know, our generous spirit has been really good in a crisis, hasn't it? That's what Australians are famous for. We've had the fires, we've had COVID. But equally now, I think thinking about aid and giving internationally, you know, is a really important cause and one that really the message is not loud enough. So I think that's a great mission for AIDN, and we've got a terrific panel to talk through how some businesses are working out a way to both make money and also have an impact. So delighted to have 3 great panelists here today. What I'd like to do first, fellas, is ask each of you to tell us a little bit about your business. So perhaps if I could go to Simon first. Who Gives a Crap literally landed in our sort of we became aware of it really suddenly, I think, in the crisis. But how did it come about, and explain your funding model?
Yeah, so I mean, we started because as consumers, we realized that we wanted to buy products that were more closely aligned with our values. And we felt like when we did that, we were compromising on product quality or on customer experience or on price. And so we wanted to design a product that, you know, looked great and felt great to use, but also did good too and kind of aligned to our values. And that was sort of the genesis of Who Gives a Crap. And so we're a home product company. Our first product was toilet paper. We sell direct to consumer, so deliver to households here in the UK and the US. And now we're a team of about 100 people. selling toilet paper, tissues, paper towels, sponges, and a few other bits and pieces as well, with team members across 6 countries. And we've donated about $8.38 million by donating half of our profits over the first 7 or 8 years of operations. So that's kind of a bit of a backstory on us and where we've come from.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you donate about 50% of your income, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So every year, as we come into the end of financial year, we're looking at how much profit we've generated for the year and then make an estimate of what 50% will be, and then try to pay out just a little bit more than that so that we kind of make sure we get over that 50% mark, because profits aren't sort of determined, properly until July, August, September typically. And so we're making our best guess in June and then paying out 50% of that just before end of financial year.
Cool. So Mark, if I bring you in here, much bigger company with Atlassian. What proportion do you give, and what was behind the thinking behind that model?
Hi, Tiki. Thanks. So for those who don't know, I imagine most do know, but Atlassian is probably Australia's most successful tech company. It was founded by Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar about 20 years ago now, straight out of university. A few years after they started, Scott and Mike had the sort of sense of presence, worldliness, I guess, to say, look, there's more to life than just the business. Let's think about how we can have an impact as well. And so they sort of took what we refer to as the pledge. They pledged to use 1% of the company's resources for good. So that actually meant 1% of equity in the company, 1% of Atlassian's profits, 1% of everybody's time, and 1% of product would be used for good. That commitment, which was sort of made on the website and sort of announced to the small number of customers they had at the time, was the basis upon which the Atlassian Foundation was subsequently created. So Scott and Mike transferred 1% of the shares in the company into the Atlassian Foundation. And the Atlassian Foundation has been going now for about 10 years. And the Atlassian Foundation itself focuses primarily on 2 different areas. One is helping to improve lives through educating disadvantaged youth around the world at scale. And secondly, by inspiring other businesses and other founders to bake social impact into the DNA of their business through the Pledge 1% movement, which is a non-profit movement that we co-founded that is encouraging others to follow the lead of Atlassian and Salesforce and those people who sort of adopt the 1% model.
So you're encouraging a leveraging up there. And what does 1% of your profits translate to?
In terms of impact or dollars?
Yes, or either.
I guess we have a series of global partnerships with people who are both implementing education-related initiatives on the ground, as well as partners who are driving ecosystems change. So we're focused. 90% of our funding goes towards education initiatives around the world. Earlier this year, we passed the $50 million mark in terms of total donations that have been made. The Atlassian Foundation itself has an asset base in excess of 200 million Aussie. So there's a pretty substantial asset base and a pretty substantial track record of donations to date.
And Peter, if I come to you, I mean, you are actually the Chief Impact Officer at Thankyou, which is, maybe going to be a really interesting new C-suite role across many companies, one would hope. But what's the story of Thankyou?
Yeah, thanks, Tiki. So great to be here as well. I would say that Thankyou started in beginnings, which is akin to maybe a lot of our listeners right now, which is they had an idea, and the idea was about solving a social good. For us, it was extreme poverty. And our co-founders were 18 at that time, so no uni experience, about maybe a couple of grand in savings, to be honest. But they had this idea of seeing whether they could usurp or redistribute the wealth from consumer packaged goods or household products, and structure a business where the entire profits or the dividends will be posted to a charitable trust, and that's our sole shareholder. And from that kind of giving mechanism or giving model, the charitable trust would look at really impactful change makers on the field, and our role there is to amplify them. And so to date, we've been able to distribute over 17 million to our partners on the ground.
Great. And what sort of impact are you having on the ground? What sort of causes are you supporting?
Yeah, so we traditionally started off with a WASH and maternal child health lens alongside livelihoods, but we just had a rethink over the last year as well, and we actually have opened up our approach in our thematic areas. A couple of reasons for that. One is we look at root causes, and the more we delved into root causes, for us, maybe a maternal child health issue wasn't something that looked very health related. It could actually be a systems change within a legislative framework that had advocacy attached to it, or maybe within tackling getting very poor households toilets and access to toilets. It could be looking at livelihoods and increasing livelihoods as well. And I think that's something that like Simon who gives a crap are really looking at as well, which is not just, hey, let's just look at an output, but hey, let's look at the root causes. And for us, that just meant let's open it up as long as our partners are having really impactful change and programs which reach the extreme poor. That's been our remit.
So if I drill down a little bit on that impact on the ground,
yeah,
Pete, how do you decide who your grantees are? Making sure that as far as you possibly can, that the good is delivered to where it's required.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different criteria that we do look at, and very much similar to Mark and Simon's as well model, where we look at impact, and what that looks like is measurable or attributable change that happens, and there's levels of robustness. So when we look at macro level systems change, so it could be political reform as well, it's really hard to get like a statistically significant 99.9% clarity that their intervention has worked there. But then similarly, there are really great partners who have direct implementation programs, which you can measure that. So we take that side of impact measurement very seriously. And then we look at scale and we look at systems as well. So do they have a really great theory of change which addresses root cause rather than just systems? And then from a scale perspective, we know that philanthropy, development, it's a short-term gap. So there needs to be scale partners. And one of the things that we do look at is who are your scale partners. So it could typically be business that a charity's approach will be scaling towards. So making sure that business and then the enabling environment is taking over that program, or is it government? So for example, public health. Like I think for us, we're really nervous when philanthropy is funding a lot of privatization of public health goods, because that should be, universal healthcare coverage is something that we really believe in. And so, hey, is that program partner scaling their approach to a government or Ministry of Health, and are working really closely together? So these are some of the factors and criteria. Then we break it down, and we can get geeky on that, but we can break it down to different proxy indicators of how we measure that.
Right. Simon, does that resonate with you? I mean, presumably the importance of choosing the right partner, especially in these times where you can't just fly out and check everything and kick the tires on the ground, is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think the one thing I'd sort of add to how we think about things is we also sort of take a bit of a kind of stock market portfolio approach. And so we have some really tried and tested approaches that we know are very sound, safe bets. And then we also have some high risk, high return stuff that, if it pays off, could completely change the way that sanitation gets implemented in urban slums, for example, but might also fail, and therefore we don't want to put too much money into it, because if we bet everything and it doesn't work, then that would be a waste of a lot of donations. And then we have some low volume, high return stuff where we're funding smaller organizations directly who are doing amazing work. But if we write them checks that are too big, it can blow their budgets out and they can become inefficient with their spending. So that's kind of the other dynamic that we think about when we're sort of building that portfolio of partners that we work with.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought, Mark. I mean, obviously you're within education. Does that vary in terms of the sort of risks of the areas and the partners, the grantees that you're working with?
Actually, there are striking similarities between the way in which Simon and the Who Gives a Crap team think about partnerships and the way we do as well. So at the highest level, we have both bottom-up and top-down partnerships. So the bottom-up are those initiatives, those programs that are in the field. The top-down are those initiatives that are designed to sort of change the ecosystem for the better. But for those that are bottom-up, we actually have what we refer to as pilot, test, and scale partnerships. Scale partnerships are those proven programs that have been subject to independent assessment of impact and evaluation. Test is those things that have been going for a while, look as though they're having impact. Perhaps they've been measuring it internally, but they haven't yet had it independently assessed. So we're sort of helping them to grow and prove the model. And then the pilot partnerships are the early stage initiatives that look as though they could be, quite revolutionary or groundbreaking in their approach. So it's interesting to see the similarities in the way in which we both think about things.
Right, and Mark, your 1% obviously now, is that locked in? Can it fall lower? Would you consider raising it higher? What is the thinking there?
Well, I guess the answer is different as to different sort of elements. So as I said earlier, Scott and Mike pledged 1% of equity, profit, time, and product. The 1% of equity has effectively been delivered in the sense that the shares were donated to the Atlassian Foundation, which has recently renamed itself Atlassian Foundation Australia, because we've got a separate entity that's Atlassian Foundation International. It's a private ancillary fund. It owns those shares in Atlassian, and those the value that's inherent in those shares can only ever be used for charitable purposes. So that is locked in, absolutely 100% philanthropic. The 1% of profit, time, and product is a very public commitment that, frankly, we'd never walk away from that because it's sort of so much part of the DNA of the company. But I guess legally, there's no compelling reason why the company would have to continue with the 1% of profit every year, or giving everybody a week a year of paid time to volunteer, which is the practice, or to make our software available, either free of charge or deeply discounted to non-profits. So legally it's not locked in, but practically it is. There's no way that we would ever sort of step back from those things. So.
And Simon, I'm very curious, what happened to your business model? Because, he's thinking of those fights in the aisles over toilet roll and everything. I mean, your revenues must have shot up. What happened to that and to the amount that you could give away?
Yeah, so I think, the winding back to March 2020, those first few days of March, we started to see our daily sales kind of double on the 1st of March, and then they were up 5 times on the 2nd of March, 12 times on the 3rd of March. On the 4th of March, we're going to do a 30 to 40 times regular day of sales, so more than a month in a day. I think at our peak, we were selling 28 rolls of toilet paper every second.
Yeah, they became presents at dinner. If you went round to dinner with somebody, you'd give them a beautiful.
Yeah. And so it was mind-boggling kind of, what happened. And so we ended up moving our store to sold out so that we could hold on to product for our subscribers and our business customers like Atlassian and Thankyou, who are both customers of ours, to make sure that they wouldn't run out. And then we set up an email sign up so you could find out when we're back in stock. We thought we'd get a few thousand people signing up for that wait list, but we ended up with more than 600,000 people on that waiting list, which is kind of a pretty big, challenging problem to solve. And so, yeah.
So obviously there was this mammoth bump, and I'm sure with Melbourne lockdowns and all this sort of stuff that, you get other bumps along the way, but, it's a bit like the pig in the python, isn't it? So after this, when these sort of scare campaigns dissipate, do you think you'll have reached a higher sort of level of awareness and business going forward as well? Because that 50% as an ongoing thing could actually be higher than it was pre-COVID. Would that be right? Yeah,
no, exactly. So definitely, greater brand awareness has sort of come out of being sent viral essentially by our customers in March, and then kind of, throughout each of the lockdowns that have occurred, we've seen the same thing happen in each of the states as well. Interestingly, we saw kind of those huge sales at the end of last financial year, and then the start of this financial year, it kind of dropped off because people now, weren't going to the bathroom any more often, but they had cupboards full of product. And so, August, September, October, our sales slumped before they kind of came back to regular levels in November, December. So it's been a little bit harder to predict what demand usually looks like. And typically our demand is actually fairly predictable. So it's made planning a little bit more challenging.
So Peter, your business as well obviously went through the roof during the lockdowns, and presumably, again, there's a much higher awareness of cleanliness and all that sort of stuff. But you also give away 100% of your profits. Now, that is an incredible thing to do, but what does that mean in terms of challenging you on, say, the growth of your business going forward, and perhaps other different products that you'd like to branch into?
Yeah, and maybe just to clarify the model as well. So we're owned 100% by our shareholder and our charitable trust. And then during the year, as every business, we do incur product costs, including new product development costs and expenses as well. But at the end, all the dividends does get posted to our charitable trust, and there is a marginal amount of retained earnings that we do as good governance. However, that as we continue, because it's 100% owned by our charitable trust, that will in time go. So that's the model itself, but it does represent a lot of challenges in terms of scale. In terms of maybe the commentary, very similar to Simon's last 12 months, or Who Gives a Crap last 12 months, we saw sanitizer and hand wash sales go through the roof. However, sanitizer now, and maybe once again parallel to Who Gives a Crap, sanitizers has been so oversaturated. There's been people loading up with sanitizers that we're seeing sort of our levels go back down to 2019 levels as well as sales. In terms of then, how do we continue building momentum and growing? There's a couple of different plays that we are looking at, and that is looking at growth through global expansion. And we can touch a bit more about this if the audience is interested in, but we launched a No Small Plan campaign late last year. And that looked at how do we grow Thankyou into global markets through using business partners and other multinationals that we would have considered as our enemies or our competitors. And that's a licensee model. And so we're looking at how does that actually work, and how do we actually grow rapidly through licensing. So that's, yeah.
Pete, that's very interesting you mentioned that, because that is a really interesting way as businesses here and all over the world look at their ESG credentials. Now, how do your own customers relate to your brands? Do you think they buy them because they recognize the cause that you're delivering, or do you think they buy them because it's an important thing to do to be buying something which has good ESG credentials and makes them feel good?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've been trying to solve that question as of day dot. Like, what is the purchase drivers or the main motivating purchase behaviors for consumers? A couple of different brand health surveys and statistics to drop. I think 2 years ago, we were really surprised to find out that 56% of our consumers that were surveyed, and this was a representational proportional survey done by a third-party company within Australia, they mentioned that 56% of consumers actually didn't buy Thankyou because of the cause. They actually didn't know that Thankyou had a cause, and that was really surprising. Fast forward, 2 years later, we have the highest customer loyalty. Also, we can calculate that based upon repeat purchases, or something called a solace rate, which I'm also still learning, but that just describes if a customer doesn't see a Thankyou product that they want on shelf, they'll walk away and they'll wait until it is on shelf. So we've got the highest customer loyalty rates across different proxies in our category. And I think trying to marry both statistics across with each other is, hey, consumers really love design. The product has to work. It can't be seen as a charity brand as well, that the cause is the only thing that sells it. And humans in general, when they're buying into a product, they want it to work and be seen to be as good as, or if not better than, the competitors. And then probably the loyalty rate, that's where we're seeing the cause really come into play, which is, hey, if I find out that the product is so great, the quality is so great, but yet also it has a cause, that's where we see sort of this really great, we'll call it a consumer purchasing wheel, where it comes kind of repeats. And whether, from that last point, whether they really believe in our cause, whether it's sort of virtue signaling, I think it might be a bit of both, and that's looking at my own personal life and my own personal journey, and looking at a mirror moment and saying, hey, maybe as humans, we are altruistic to a degree, but also I think there's some sort of self-interest motivation there as well. Right. So a couple of responses.
Simon, do you get that wheel as well? I mean, what happens? What do you think the thinking is of your consumers?
Yeah, so we sort of think about a three-legged stool. So we talk about looks good, feels good, does good, and you've kind of got to do all three of those things together in order to really build what we call the organic flywheel that helps customers tell other people about our product. If you do two of those things, you can be successful, but nowhere near as successful as all three. And that's why it's a three-legged stool. If you remove one, it falls over. You can still sit on it. It's not very comfortable, but when you get all three, it's sort of the special sauce that makes it all work. And so that's kind of what we build all of our products around. And then the other thing that we think about is how we build brands that are someone that you'd want to sit next to at a dinner party. So they shouldn't be one-sided and just tell you the same thing over and over again about, the recent trip to Africa that they've done, or, only talk about climate change. You want to sit next to someone who can tell you a great joke, has a deep interest in, cooking, and can also talk about, their recent trip to Africa or their love of climate change, and what they're doing to support that. So we try to build really well-rounded brands that enable our customers to engage in multiple facets.
So, Mark, what about the Atlassian brand? I mean, we know that Scott and indeed, Mike is very vocal on how passionate he is about the environment and all the things he's doing there. Do you think users of Atlassian understand that you're also giving away 1%? And how do you see your customers?
Yeah, I think for us, it's probably more the focus. And for our customers, it's more a focus upon the commercial value or the value they get out of the products, out of the software. I mean, Atlassian's mission as a company is to unleash the potential of all teams, and fundamentally, the software is software that is designed to help teams be more impactful, more productive, more efficient. And fortunately, the software has always sold itself. It's always been incredibly good software. I don't think too many Atlassian customers sort of are downloading and subscribing to the software license because of the activities of the Atlassian Foundation or because of Pledge 1%. Notwithstanding that, though, there are many people who are aware of the fact that Atlassian's got a great culture and is baking social impact into the DNA of the business as much as possible, and that's a good thing. I don't think it actually drives customer behavior that much in our case. I mean, at its core, Atlassian is fundamentally a commercial enterprise, but it's a commercial enterprise that's got everything you'd want to see in the DNA of a for-profit business.
So, Mark, we are seeing examples of impact investing pop up in different places. I mean, Leapfrog here in Australia is a classic example of the different things, and I think they're getting funds and private equity backing these sorts of models. Equally, you could go to AstraZeneca, which I know is in the news again for the wrong reasons, but 450 million doses worldwide, not for profit. That sort of impact investing is I think, really laudable. Do you think the community out there understands this new type of capitalism?
Yes, I do. I think that more and more people are thinking about, can they be investing, through their super funds or whatever directly in businesses, in initiatives that not only generate an acceptable commercial return, but are actually also having a positive social impact on the world. So I think that's part of the reason why adopting best practice when it comes to baking impact and purpose into the DNA of a business makes good sense from a business perspective as well, because more and more capital is flowing to those businesses that are performing well and making a positive contribution to the world. The Atlassian Foundation itself allocates some of our asset base to impact investments. So, some of our funds have been placed with impact investment funds. Others have been invested directly into businesses that are hopefully going to be successful in a commercial sense, but are also having a really positive social impact on the world, particularly in the area of education. So we've got a small number of investments in businesses that are focused upon improving lives through education, but doing so profitably.
Simon, do you agree with that social impact is seeping out there in the community? There is an understanding, and how important is it to, within your own business, have a set of values and a purpose as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we're seeing this in public markets now. You know, Oatly's recent IPO is kind of case in point for the way that assets that are doing good for the world are being priced, you know, at multiples that you would see being way above what would typically be seen for an oat milk company, not a technology company. We're seeing that with Beyond Meat, you know, Tesla closer to technology, but all pricing at multiples that are just way higher than what has previously been seen in those categories. So super interesting trend. They're all obviously sustainability focused, but I think, you know, the broader kind of trend that we're seeing now is this move towards consumers buying from companies that they believe in, that closely align to the ethics and values that they have. And sustainability is kind of at the leading edge of that. But I think this next decade will be about the broader ethics of businesses. And so everyone here kind of well positioned to play a role in that, which is interesting.
So how do you, Simon, educate your customers about the good that you're doing? I mean, is it sitting there on the packet? Do you have brand campaigns? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. So, you know, we, all of our assets, whether it's our website, our packaging, our emails, our, you know, above the line marketing that we're putting on, you know, trams and billboards in Melbourne at the moment, all of that's talking about our impact in different ways. But also trying to do it in a way that is fun and engaging and talks about some of the other aspects of our brand as well. So, you know, our recent kind of billboard campaign's been a great example of this. That was dubbed Powder the Poopers. And, you know, we put up billboards around Melbourne saying things like make farts not war and give pee a chance, which, you know, probably should never have been printed on a billboard, but we're able to get away with it and loosely kind of, you know, connect back to the impact that we have as an organization, and that, you know, you can make a difference by sitting down for what you believe in. So all of our kind of campaigns ladder into the impacts that we have as an organization, sometimes more directly or indirectly than others.
So Peter, Simon obviously has a bit of humour in his delivery of his product. How do you engage and educate your customers?
Yeah, I think maybe something that we do share, and to Simon's point, is like you have to be really authentic. And I think for Who Gives a Crap, authenticity is definitely like tongue in cheek, really fun, really humorous. I wish I could be that, but maybe from our end, it's the authenticity part comes into just being transparent and honest about what's not working as much as what's working as well. And that's something that's really resonated with our consumers. And that goes both with us looking hard at ourselves as a philanthropic organization, saying, hey, what are the mistakes that we've made? So we sort of released an annual letter from our charitable trust that details why we've done this almost 180 shift, and we have a new funding model, and sort of unrestricted giving, multi-year giving as being the North Star there. What are the lessons that we've learned there as well? And I think that really helps not only to share learnings, but also in this purpose-driven movement that we're seeing consumers resonate with. They can really smell what's authentic and not. And I think for us, just really being honest, transparent about both our philanthropic, but our business's success and failures, or learnings as we call it, that really resonates. And that's something that we will try and always wear on our sleeves.
And Peter, it's such a clean brand. Thank you. I mean, it's amazing that the brand hasn't been taken up, you know, somewhere else. But it's got a lot of layers underneath it in terms of what it can mean to different people at different times. So who came up with the brand idea?
Definitely our co-founders. So it was Daniel, Justine, Jared as well. And yeah, I think definitely all credit to them, because they had a really, really tough startup journey, as you can imagine. 3 uni-age students, 0 investment, and they all work part-time jobs, and lots of, once again on that failure journey, lots of moments of just about to quit moments, or tears in the car parks. And it was just really, really hard for the first 3 to 4 years. But I think as a result of that sacrifice, that passion, that perseverance, we're at a stage where we are at. And yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people really forget on startup journeys, on how hard it is. And it still is really, really tough as well.
Well, all credit to them. Now Mark.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, Peter's comment triggered a thought in my mind. You know, the learnings and the experience. We set the goal in our education focus area shortly after I joined the Atlassian Foundation and sort of developed our strategy. to help to educate 10 million disadvantaged youth within 10 years. That sort of set a light on the hill about wanting to have impact at scale and the like. One of the learnings for us was that actually had some unintended negative consequences. We would never ever trade off impact for numbers. And I mentioned earlier that we have sort of partnerships that we define as pilot, test, and scale. Well, we found that one of the unintended negative consequences of setting the goal of 10 million in 10 years was that some of our pilot partners were thinking, wow, it's all about scale, it's all about numbers. And so they were investing in trying to grow the number of people that they were supporting, the number of disadvantaged kids who they were educating, before they were actually sort of putting the foundations properly in place. And so luckily we had a good enough relationship for that unintended consequence to become apparent. And as a result of that, we were able to sort of reassure them that absolutely no, the last thing we would ever want to do is sort of compromise the foundations or the stability or the sustainability of a program just for the sake of numbers. And we're also actually in the process of sort of removing the reference to 10 in 10 from our public messaging. And now it'll just be more about impact at scale. Each of the partnerships we have has to have the potential to impact at least 1 million lives, but we're removing reference to the 10 in 10.
That's very interesting. Do you have more broadly a sense of whether Australians now are giving more internationally or thinking about giving more international?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I think so, but can I point to specific evidence to back up that belief? Not particularly. I mean, I think there is a sense of perspective and worldliness and a recognition that we all have a role to play in making a difference globally, not just in our own backyard. So my instincts are that yes, it's something that is increasing in focus and attention, but I can't really back it up with any evidence to prove it. I don't know whether or not Pete or Simon, you can share anything that you think helps in that context.
Yeah, fellas.
Yeah, I was going to say, hey, Mark, that would be this great starting point on. I'm not sure. There are different theories that we're seeing play out as well. But I think maybe to tackle that question on another angle, it's the idea of how important corporate philanthropy or doing social enterprise or having a business that has a funding model where, Aussies, we really had it tough in 2020, and I think everyone had a lot of concerns internally and looking at local issues and looking at, hey, how's my neighbor, how's my immediate family, and compassion fatigue has become so real, and we're seeing that play out in our comms and seeing that play out within trying to even broach the subject of extreme poverty.
I was seeing just a comment pop up there, Pete, that I think from Rod Matchell, I hope I got that right, that actually the JB Weir report recently had the fact that actually the numbers were going down in terms of numbers going internationally.
Yeah, and that's that sense of, gosh, 2020 local, let's just try and survive this year. The moment you broach extreme poverty that's happening in someone else's country, there may be this disconnect. But I think that's remarkably why Simon's business, Mark's business, Thankyou as well, plays a role within saying, hey, within your everyday let's say lifestyle, here are opportunities that you didn't even know that you can contribute to very important causes. And for me, I don't maybe necessarily wake up and think through, gosh, I wonder what's going on in Zimbabwe or Ivory Coast, or looking at Mali and health or extreme poverty. But then, hey, sometimes as humans, we care about our hand washes or toilet paper. And because of that, that's why maybe corporate or social enterprises and that giving model, redistribution model does play a role, an important role as well. And I think that's something that, it's actually a really great honor to try and play a role in this space.
So, Simon, I was just going to say, Mark Cubitt has just sort of popped up there, which he says he's got a different view from the JB Weir report. He thinks he's on the cusp of things. Mark, do you want to pop up?
Yes, here I have. I'm officially popped up. The reports done by JB Weir are excellent on the sector and based on the data that's out there. But sometimes I'd question the data that is available, and it's really hard to encapsulate what is international giving. When foundations, for example, fill out their paperwork every year, it's not always obvious where you should put on the paperwork you file as to whether your giving is going internationally or not. My view is only anecdotal, but particularly this year, as we're heading into June 30, with various organisations I'm involved in, we're getting a lot of incoming calls from people about, tell me about this project, tell me about that organisation, international giving, how do we go about doing it? At the end of the day, I think, be it through models like Atlassian or Thankyou, or Who Gives a Crap, be it through efforts of Aiden or other promoters of international giving, I think people are starting to realise these issues that we're facing today in our own community. And of course, it's COVID-19. These issues are global. So there are times when people head off and, of course, focus on bushfires at home or whatever. But I do really sense that we're going to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic with a greater realisation of how people can help overseas.
So Mark Cubitt, while I've got you there, do you think, I mean, we're thinking about, say, vaccines, and everybody's kind of getting the message that it would be a good idea for all of us if the whole of the world was vaccinated. But issues like foreign aid, government foreign aid, which never seems to go up and often seems to go down, but also in terms of Australia, the importance of our soft power in the region here. Do you think those types of issues also colour people's view of wanting to donate to international causes?
I don't think it colours their views. One couldn't possibly be optimistic on international aid at the moment. If anyone's leading the move towards being more tribal, caring about me, I think it's governments, or if it's politics, we're seeing in many countries people fleeing to the left of politics, fleeing to the right of politics. So I don't think there's a move there. But people give money to people at the end of the day when we're talking about the traditional form of donation, not the social business models that we're talking about here today. If people have put in front of them a fascinating water project in Kenya, a hospital that needs assistance in Cambodia, and if they feel they can trust that cause, and I think more and more they're realising you can, then people will give money. Yeah.
Right. Mark Redding, let me bring you back in here. I think we've started something here. Stuart Thompson has just typed in. He said he's really interesting that Mark Cubitt has this view, but he'd strongly disagree with it. He says, in my experience, having sat with a large number of family foundations over the past 12 months, they brought most of their focus back into Australia. Mark Redding, what's your take on that?
I guess I don't personally spend that much time with Australian foundations because our focus is so international. Most of my connections are with international foundations that are also focused upon education. But I guess I just wanted to share, why it is that we focus internationally rather than in Australia. And I think it's basically very similar to the thinking behind, Thankyou and Who Gives a Crap. And that is that at the end of the day, we want to have as much impact as we possibly can. And there is a belief that a life is a life is a life. It doesn't matter whether you had the good fortune of being born in Australia or another developed high income country, or the less fortune of being born into a low income country. Your life is worth just as much, irrespective of where you were born. And given that our goal is to have the maximum possible impact we can with the resources that we're entrusted with, the dollar goes further in low income countries. And so for us, we can have more impact on more people and more lives by partnering with organizations who are educating disadvantaged kids, typically in low-income countries. So for us, it's that core belief that there's nothing that inherently makes an Australian life or a US life or a European life any more valuable or any more worthy than a life of somebody who's born in Asia or Africa, for example.
Quite. Mark Cubitt, do you want to hop back in there briefly? Or?
Look, I definitely respect the view, as I think Stuart's written there, that his experience of money being brought back to Australia, I would not argue with that at all. But I would say, though, that international giving as a proportion of the total giving pie in Australia is very small. So it's really difficult to measure what is going on out there. We're not talking of something that's 10, 20 or 30% of total philanthropy. So, and I would also stress that I think what I'm seeing is more forward-looking rather than necessarily what's happened in the last 12 months or so.
Right. So Simon, really interesting. Who Gives a Crap, I think, donated more than some of Australia's biggest companies this year. Are donations rising in business, do you think, or do you think 2020 was a bit of an aberration?
I mean, for us, it was 2020 was definitely a bit of an aberration to be running a toilet paper company. So, you know, our donation last year was bigger than we'd anticipated because we had sales coming in towards the end of the financial year that were above forecast, and also weren't spending anything on marketing. And so not only was our revenue higher, but our cost base was lower as well. And as a result, we were able to turn a much larger profit and therefore donation. So our donation this year, we're just getting ready to pay it out now, will come down a bit from last year as we sort of normalize a little bit. But in terms of kind of across the board and what's happening with other companies, I think it'll probably depend a lot on you know, what the last 12 or 18 months have been like for those companies. I've got friends with hospitality businesses who definitely won't be looking at making any donations at this point in time, and friends with, you know, e-commerce and digital businesses who are definitely kind of, you know, making more donations than what they've seen before. So it's really going to be a sort of industry by industry phenomenon, I think.
Mark Redding, back to you. What do you think about the big end of town and the corporate, the social license to operate now? Do you think that is going to put some pressure on companies to really, I mean, we're all talking about emissions all the time, but in terms of the other elements of the S in ESG, do you think that could nudge some bigger businesses to do more?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think we've been seeing that trend for a number of years now. Within the Pledge 1% community, it's tended to resonate more with early stage startups because it's easy to sort of donate 1% of your resources when you don't have much in the way of resources. And then as your business grows, the value of your contribution increases. It's much more difficult for a large listed public company to be pledging 1% of their profits or their equity or anything like that. So the Pledge 1% movement itself tends to be dominated by smaller startup or high growth companies. But absolutely, yes, I think every single company is seeing an increased expectation of from an ESG perspective generally, and every single business is trying to do what they can. Some are doing it incredibly authentically, others are doing it less authentically. I think as humans by nature, we've all got pretty strong bullshit detectors. You tend to be able to work out who's authentic and who's not.
I'm just wondering, Mark, though, when you say public companies might find that more difficult, we look at some of the investors, the big institutional investors who are now looking at ESG very seriously. I'm wondering what a board of a public company would think about announcing that they were going to give 1% away internationally, for example, and whether that might not even be strategic these days going forward.
Indeed. Well, certainly from our perspective, Scott and Mike were motivated 100% by a desire to make a contribution to the world and have a positive impact and use some of the resources of Atlassian for good. But they will openly say it was, look, actually, from a business perspective, it's proven to be one of the very best decisions they ever took. But I think the reason that it's one of the very best business decisions they ever took was because there was such authenticity behind the motivation. If you're not truly authentically motivated by wanting to use the resources that you happen to be a custodian of for good, if you're actually doing it for brand polishing or anything like that, then I suspect that that the business benefits don't actually flow. People see through it, and you sort of generate a bit of a knee-jerk adverse reaction. But if there's a genuinely authentic desire to use the resources for impact, then yes, it is perceived very well, and that's good for the business, both from an employee engagement and recruitment and retention perspective, as well as from a general customer brand perspective as well. If you've got a choice between two offerings, that are both pretty similar in many respects, but one's clearly part of an organization with values that you align with and you know, who you admire or respect and maybe even admire, you're going to choose the organization that you respect and admire, and they're offering over an alternative that's you know, doesn't have anything like that embedded in it.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions coming in. I'll throw to you all. But Pete, before I do, what do you think about trying to get more corporate giving, perhaps in a strategic way, up at the big end of town? And the other question I wanted to ask you about was your employees. How important is this to your employees from a values point of view?
Maybe the last question on that with the employees, very, very important. We try and embed this not just in our external comms, but internally as well, where we sit down. It's going maybe about once every 2 months. It used to be once every quarter, but once every 2 months where we sit down as a team and we have one of our grantees, one of our partners actually just share their work with our team and open forums like this where our team gets to connect with the partners that they actually fund. And we had a recent employee survey as well, and one of the really, I'd say, cool things that came out of it was just how closely connected our employees did feel to their mission, and therefore how much that inspires them to continue to, you know, kind of get through the day and continue to crunch out sort of the work and task. And I think that is actually what a lot of Gen Y, millennials, a lot of people are really looking for in terms of job satisfaction. In terms of, just increasing corporate giving, especially in the big end of town. I think obviously that's a yes. My probably caveat to that is I'm very interested in not just the amount, but how someone gives, you know, and how philanthropic organizations are giving, and how thoughtful they are, and maybe how grantee centric they are as well. And I think the two organizations that I'm sharing this panel are very thoughtful in how they give. And I think that would be my big watch out on, like, hey, it's not just the amount of giving, but how are you actually amplifying, how you're supporting your grantees and partners.
Well, just on that, I've got a question, I think probably for Mark reading here. Malati Mosquito, she says, Mark, what external accreditations do you prefer your partners to work towards? She says, I run, I think it's she, excuse me, I run an education through football program in Eastern Indonesia, which also supports the parents of the players with agribusiness. What accreditation would be suitable, he says.
We're not so much focused upon the accreditation itself, so I wouldn't say there's any particular accreditation that we're looking for. In fact, we're very open to supporting any particular organization or initiative, irrespective of the legal form or accreditation it might have. We're much more focused upon the impact that it's having at present, has the potential to have, the sort of the degree of impact and the number of people who are benefiting from the organization. So, for example, in Indonesia, one of our global partners is a business called Ruang Guru. Ruang Guru is Indonesia's largest edutech business. It's a for-profit. It's basically a unicorn. We've been supporting them now for about 4 years. Fundamentally, we're actually partially funding their CSR activity in Indonesia. So they've got an edutech platform that is paid for by those Indonesians who can afford it. Even then, it's still only a small amount of money. It's only, you know, a couple of dollars per month for access. But there are a hell of a lot of Indonesian kids who can't afford access, and so we're funding the work that Ruang Guru is doing to make that platform available to you know, disadvantaged Indonesian youth who can't even afford, you know, the prices charged by Ruang Guru. That's a for-profit company. I guess fundamentally, we are focused upon making sure that impact is measured as much as possible, and that it is independently measured. That's more important to us than any single accreditation.
All right. Yes, a comment coming in here. Love the view from Malati that the S in ESG has been interpreted by big companies as internal rather than external to the community. Pete, what do you think about that?
We're not probably here even as Thankyou to throw any organization and companies into sort of a shade. So I would say maybe from your experience that could be true. what we're seeing more of in terms of this build towards a purpose-driven organization or company that I feel a lot of large organizations are pivoting to or trying to pivot to, is this really interesting idea of what is truly authentic, or what is something that is, we'll call it like paint, so purpose paint that you're just washing over a big large scale organizations, and consumers really can see through that. And so yeah, I think that would be my question mark around industry or other sort of for-profits that see ESG or even purpose as something they can just paint over the exterior without internalizing it with like, yeah, a great structure, a great model, or great board or governance decisions.
Yeah. Simon, question from Mark Clough around program efficiency, obviously very important in social impact. How do you avoid tripping over competitors and creating duplication? Do you need to adjust your course focus, or do you create partnerships? I mean, presumably there are other players and NGOs looking at sort of water issues internationally.
Yeah, I mean, generally what we've found is that it's a very cooperative space, unlike business where you're kind of competing for the same customer with, with funding organizations. You're all working towards the same shared goal. And so we've generally found there hasn't been too many issues with competitors, and probably quite the opposite, where we've been able to borrow other people's due diligence notes to kind of get comfortable with an organization we're investing in, or ask for introductions to organizations that we don't have relationships with, even from people that we're funding, when they know that means it might reduce the funding that we give them in the year ahead. So generally speaking, we haven't sort of had that problem. I'd be curious to understand if anyone else has, but yeah, we found it's a very cooperative space.
Right.
Yeah, certainly my experience is pretty similar. We absolutely prefer to be co-funding initiatives rather than sort of taking on the primary responsibility. We actually just think it's fundamentally unhealthy for any particular initiative to be too heavily reliant upon any single funder. So from our perspective, ideally we would never be providing more than about 1/3 of the funding for any particular program or initiative. We certainly wouldn't want to be providing any more than 50%, but if we can get it down to 1/3 or less, that's even better. We are part of collaborative efforts. For example, a thing called Co-Impact, which is a group of funders who have come together to sort of share the responsibility for due diligence and impact assessment and the like, rather than everybody going off and doing it on their own. I personally am a big believer in collaboration in this space rather than everybody operating independently.
Yeah, got a huge questions, a rush of questions at the last minute, but so I'll just try and get as many as I can quickly. Mark, while I've got you there, how do you rate your model of impact compared to non-profits? How do you see your models as more impactful versus NGOs, from Andrew Hudson?
I actually don't sort of see it as ours versus NGOs. I sort of see ours as we're a contributing player in an ecosystem that's designed to try and have as much impact as possible. I mean, we partner up with NGOs that are doing great things in the world, and we do our very best to support them, both with our financial support and the expertise of Atlassians who are all given a week a year of paid time to go and volunteer. So it's not a question of us versus the alternative, but more how can we collectively maximize the impact that we have. That's certainly the way that I think about it.
All right, Pete, a quick one to you from Vijay Selensky. Last one, I think. Is impact investing focused on companies that make services and products and then siphon funds to support good causes, or can't it be companies that are creating services and directly help 100%, be it mental health or environment? He says in this session it sounds like the first one, the former.
Yeah, I feel like maybe impact investing is one separate bucket we're involved in. We would call it like philanthropy, but in terms of the heart of the question, I feel like it's the idea of how you're actually making the money. And if sort of the purpose is all about just how you give, then we've definitely missed the boat. And I think that's a very, very true statement, because I think every single one of us in this room, we really deeply think about what is our impact, not just downstream, but what's our upstream impact. So looking at the environment, looking at, for us, it's carbon, waste and water, and we've got goals that you can read on our website. From a social perspective as well, there's that, once again, that correlation between, if our focus is extreme poverty and we use business as a vehicle, similarly, in terms of how we we have income and revenue streams through this business, it shouldn't lead someone into forced labor. It shouldn't at all like exploit humans that we then deliver some sort of profit from there. So we all think very deeply, I would say, about that.
Look, I think that's a really good point to end on, and a very responsible one. I would like to thank the panel. It's just so much information coming through here. I want to hand over to Mark Cubitt to wrap it up, maybe with a couple of questions that came in at the end on that nature, which is around measurement of and responsibility around ESG and operations of organizations like yourselves, and do you measure environmental impact as well as some stories about these NGOs are implicated in doing more harm than good. How do you relate to that? And Mark, to wrap up as well. Thank you.
Great. Hey, thank you very much, Tiki. I think everyone listening today would agree that was an absolutely wonderful 1 hour. Really time well spent, I would think. One of my takeaways actually is we could have had a fascinating hour talking about all of these incredibly successful businesses and their business models without even referencing the fact that they donate significant amounts of money to causes overseas. You can just think of these as businesses firstly, before one even thinks about them being impact ventures or businesses having impact. Incredibly successful business models. It shows it can be done. The amount of money that's already being donated away is incredibly significant. And what strikes me about that as someone who has to rattle a tin and try and raise money for charitable causes is that it's being done without begging anyone to give money, as was made clearly pointed out by Peter Yao, I think it was, who said you have to be authentic to the customer. You have to give the customer a good product, and that's clearly what all these businesses are doing. Thank you to all our panel. Thank you very much, Tiki, for looking after us today in your incredibly busy schedule. The recording from today will be available on the Aiden website within days and will be emailed to you if you register. Well, you did register if you're here. All past webinars are available on the website as well, along with the first 4 in our series of podcasts. The Australian International Development Network, it's all about more and better giving and investing internationally. Don't be a stranger. If you want to give more, give better, or if you are on the doing side, contact us. We're eager for your assistance, resources, and ideas. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for listening. And as we learned today, power to the poopers. Thank you.
Thank you.